I was unfairly fired from my job and now I don't know what to do. I thought this situation would never happen to me, but life can be unpredictable. I was fired unfairly and I couldn't do anything about it, and even now I can't decide what the best thing to do is. My name is Sarah. I am 43 years old, and I have spent the last 10 years of my life working in a textile mill in a small industrial town in Ohio. This town was a place where people had worked in factories and mills for generations, and our factory was one of the largest in the area. Here, amidst the endless rows of looms and the noises of machinery, not just fabrics were born, but stories of families intertwined by threads of labor and perseverance. For many of us, myself included, the factory was not just a job, but a real part of our lives. In the 10 years I've spent here, I've seen generations of workers change, new technologies come and old methods go. But one thing remained the same, the spirit of solidarity and mutual support that prevailed among us. We were a team, ready to support each other in any situation. Every morning I got up at 4 o'clock to prepare breakfast for the children and to get ready myself. These early risings became a routine for me, as natural as breathing. My husband was long gone, leaving me alone with 2 teenage children. Loneliness is especially acute at such times, but I learned to cope with it through work and taking care of my children. I needed money all the time, so I couldn't afford to miss shifts. Even the thought of staying at home seemed impossible. I had to provide for my family, and working in the factory was my only source of income. Besides, I really loved my job. You know, when you do the same thing for years on end, it becomes kind of second nature. You know how to set up the right machine, what material is best to use, what little things can ruin a batch of goods. So, I knew every cog in my production line. I could close my eyes and visualize how each part of the mechanism worked. This knowledge gave me a sense of confidence and stability, which I lacked in my personal life. Sometimes, standing at the machine, I would reflect on how much this work had become a part of me. There was something soothing, almost meditative about it. The rhythm of the work, the monotonous whirring of the machines, the smell of fresh fabrics, it all created a sense of security and order. I knew that I could handle any difficulties in production, because over the years I had learned to understand every aspect of the process. This understanding gave me strength and confidence despite all the challenges I had to face in life. One morning I came on shift, as usual, a little tired after a sleepless night. My child was sick, but ready for a new day. There was no sign of trouble. I took my usual place near the machine, turned it on and started checking the materials. The machine hummed softly, filling the space with the familiar sound I had heard every day for years. But suddenly there was a strange sound, as if something inside the machine was stuck. It was unusual, it had never happened before. I became alert and listened more closely. The sound grew louder and louder, turning into a sharp scraping sound that pierced my ears. I instantly pressed the emergency shutdown button, but the machine continued to hum, making eerie noises. My heart beat faster. Something had clearly gone wrong. Panic set in on the shop floor. The workers, busy with their work, turned toward the source of the noise. One of them ran to call the foreman, another to call the shift supervisor. All eyes turned to me, as if looking for an explanation. I stood motionless, watching what was happening. The machine was shaking, and it looked like it was about to explode. No one knew what to do. There was fear and tension in the air. The minutes dragged on endlessly until the foreman arrived on the scene. He walked over to the machine, examined it carefully, then put his ear to the casing, trying to figure out what was going on. His face expressed concern. "Something serious," he muttered, shaking his head. There was an alarm in those words that could not be ignored. The foreman stepped aside, pulled out his cell phone and started calling someone, probably reporting the incident. The whole shop froze in anticipation. The workers were whispering, discussing possible causes of the breakdown. Some suggested that it might have been due to wear and tear on the equipment, while others talked about possible electrical problems. Half an hour later, when the voltage had peaked, the supervisors entered the shop. Their faces were serious, and it was clear from their looks that the situation was not easy. They gathered in a corner, talking quietly, occasionally glancing in our direction. Finally, one of them approached us and announced that everyone should go home. There will be a meeting tomorrow, he added, without specifying exactly what would be discussed. That evening I went to bed with a heavy heart. I realized that the breakdown was serious, but I hoped that everything would be fine. The next morning, however, when I arrived at work, I saw that our site was taped off and security wouldn't let anyone inside. Did something burn? I thought, but then I remembered that there was no sign of fire yesterday. Later it turned out that there had been a serious malfunction in the machine's control system. The supervisors were trying to figure out who might have been responsible. I silently listened to my colleagues' conversations, trying not to attract attention. After all, I knew for sure that I was doing everything right. Maybe it was just an accident. But a couple days later, I was called into the office of the chief engineer. When I entered, he was sitting at his desk, and next to him stood the director of the plant. The room was filled with a heavy silence that seemed almost palpable. The engineer looked serious and focused, while the director looked glum and disgruntled. "Sarah," the engineer began, "we've conducted an internal investigation and found that human error was the cause of the breakdown." My hands trembled, my heart pounding in my chest. I knew what this meant, but I still hoped for the best. "You mean me?" I asked, even though I knew the answer perfectly well. My voice was shaking, and I could barely keep from crying right there in front of these men who had known me for so many years. "Yes, Sarah," the director confirmed, looking at me with a cold stare. "You made a mistake in setting up the machine, which caused a malfunction. We lost an entire batch of production because of it." His voice was firm and ruthless, like a sentence. My eyes filled with tears. "No, that's impossible," I exclaimed, feeling the world around me begin to crumble. "I've always followed instructions." The engineer raised his hand, stopping my protests. "We have reviewed the security footage and found that you did indeed make a mistake. Therefore, unfortunately, we have to fire you." His tone was neutral, but there was weariness and frustration in it. It seemed like he wasn't happy about the decision either, but had to follow the rules. The world spun around me. 10 years of perfect work, thousands of hours spent at this plant, and now it was all over with one phrase. Tears streamed down my face, but I tried to keep my composure. "How could you do that?" I whispered, barely holding myself back from bursting into tears right in front of them. The director and the engineer exchanged glances, as if confirming the correctness of the decision. "Alas, rules are rules," the director replied. "You will be paid your last month's salary, and we are prepared to offer you a recommendation to find a new job." His words sounded like empty promises. A recommendation. As if that could make up for losing everything I'd lived for the past few years. I took the paperwork and walked out of the office without a word. The door slammed shut behind me, and I felt tears rolling down my cheeks. When I got home, I told my children what had happened. They tried to comfort me, but what can I say? Our lives had changed forever. Money was tight and I had to find a new job. But who would hire a middle-aged woman with no experience outside the factory? A few weeks later, I finally found a temporary part-time job at a neighboring store. The pay was meager, but at least it was something. The kids started helping around the house, trying to lighten my burden. But every night when I went to bed, I remembered that unfortunate meeting in the principal's office and wondered, how could they throw me out on the street so easily? A year passed. I continued to work at the store, trying to make ends meet. At times I caught myself thinking that my life had turned into a series of gray everyday life, where there was no room for dreams and ambitions. But what could I do? I had to feed the kids, pay the bills, and try not to get discouraged. One evening, walking home after a tiring day at work, I noticed a familiar figure walking toward me. It was Tom, a former colleague from the factory. We hadn't seen each other since I'd been fired, and seeing him caused mixed feelings. On the one hand, it was nice to see a familiar face, but on the other hand, the memories of the day I'd been kicked out came flooding back. "Hi, Sarah," he said, stepping closer. "It's been a while." His voice was warm and friendly, as always. Tom was always a nice guy, ready to help in any situation. Hello, Tom, I replied, trying to look calmer than I really was. How are you doing? Although it was hard on my heart, I didn't want to show my emotions. Tom sighed, and his face darkened. Well, things at the factory aren't as smooth as they seemed. After you left, the trouble started. People say the bosses decided to save money on parts and equipment maintenance. I guess that's why the machines break down a lot. He spoke slowly, as if weighing each word. These words made me think. Maybe my mistake was just a pretext for dismissal? After all, saving money on repairs could have had such consequences. But who would admit to that? Bosses will always find a way to justify their actions, even if it costs someone their job. I felt a wave of resentment rising inside. How could they do this? How could they sacrifice someone's life to save money? Tom continued to talk, telling me how conditions in the factory had deteriorated, how many employees had started to leave, unable to stand the pressure. Some even think your story is just the tip of the iceberg, he added. Many are sure you were just used as a scapegoat. His words made me think. If that was true, then maybe I wasn't the only victim of this system. But what could I do? Raise a ruckus, start a fight? Or was it better to put the past behind me and move on? The question remained open, and I didn't know how to answer it. Tom continued, by the way, I hear you've been offered a recommendation. Do you really think they sincerely wanted to help? I shrugged. Honestly, I didn't even use it. I just didn't want to deal with those people. Tom nodded. I understand your point. But a lot of us feel you were unfairly fired. Maybe you should try filing a grievance or going to the union. The thought seemed tempting. Maybe it really is possible to get justice? But, on the other hand, how much time and effort would it take? And most importantly, would I get my job back even if I proved my case? Doubts and fears swarmed in my mind. Justice is important, of course, but what if the fight drags on for years? Will I be able to provide for my children if I spend all my energy on litigation? And even if I win, will they want me back at the factory? After all, my relationship with the management is already ruined. We said goodbye, and I went home, thinking about what I had heard. On the one hand, justice demanded action. On the other hand, life went on, and I had to think about my children's future. What was more important, fighting for truth or stability? These questions did not give me rest, and every day I thought about what decision to make. More months passed. I never decided to file a complaint. Time passed, the children grew up, and gradually I got used to the new reality. Of course, the memories of the factory and the unfair dismissal continued to torment me, but I tried not to dwell on the past. I had to move forward, to build a new future. Sometimes I met former colleagues who told me that strange things continued to happen at the factory. Some said that the equipment was getting old and needed to be replaced, others claimed that the bosses were hiding the real causes of the problems. These conversations gave me a mixture of feelings, pity for those who remained in the factory and relief that I was no longer connected to the place. Then one day, when I had almost forgotten about my past, I got a letter. It was from a lawyer representing the union. The letter said that the union was investigating wrongful dismissals at the factory and asked me to testify. An honest confession of what I had experienced could help others avoid a similar fate. The lawyer assured me that my testimony would be important and could make a difference. I pondered the offer for a long time. What if I accepted? What if it helped others avoid the same fate that had befallen me? But what if it doesn't make a difference? What if it wastes my energy and my nerves? After all, the process could drag on for months, if not years. Will I be able to handle the pressure? And what if nothing changes as a result? These questions kept bothering me. On the one hand, I realized that by agreeing, I could make a difference in the factory. Perhaps my testimony would help other employees avoid unfair treatment. But on the other hand, I had already adapted to my new life. To fight for justice was to return to a past I had tried to forget. And what if, after going through all this, I was left with nothing? That's the story that remains unfinished. I don't know what to do next. Should I take a risk and try to get my name back? Or is it better to put the past behind me and move on? The question remains open.